Hello. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We're really happy to have you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jenny Wanger. I'm on the leadership team here at the Linux Foundation Public Health. And this is our first event of the new year. So 2021, we've put a lot of high hopes on it, and hopefully this webinar at least contributes to some of that positive energy that we've all been giving into the new year. For those of you who aren't familiar with Linux Foundation Public Health, welcome, first off. We are a organization, we're part of the Linux Foundation, and we specialize in creating open source ecosystems and all of the different things that go on around open source software beyond just making the actual code itself. And so this means that we hold events like this to educate people on what are some of the different things going on, what are some of the different activities going on out there. We help support open source projects by helping them with governance, with marketing, with finding new contributors, all of those sorts of things. And all of this is with the goal of really changing how software works within the public health industry. As we all know, public health is absolutely critical and such an important area of work. And it's been underfunded and undersupported for so many years. So we're really excited to be jumping in at this point, and helping to try and find ways that we can get better, more high quality software to public health authorities and to all of the other different groups within the public health industry that are supporting that. So with that, if you do want to get involved, we would love to have you. There's a couple of easy ways to get started. One is that you can join our Slack community. You can go to slack.lfph.io, and I'll put that in the chat in a few minutes, and join there and get started. If you like this topic and you want to keep going on this conversation, we have channels on vaccines and CCI, both. And so you can go in there, join the conversation, start some new ones. We'd love to have you. We'd love to have your thoughts and your reactions as well to what you hear today. Another option, you can head over to our website, lfph.io, and there you can sign up for our newsletter. That's another good way to hear about upcoming opportunities on how to get involved. And we'd love to have you. So today we are doing an introduction to vaccine credentials. They have been in the news a ton. What are they? What's the, there's so many things floating around, and we thought that it would be really great to do this webinar both as an opportunity to introduce the context of what vaccine credentials are, as well as introduce Linux Foundation Public Health's newest group, which is the COVID Credentials Initiative. So COVID Credentials Initiative started back back in the spring, and I'll allow Lucy to introduce themselves more. But we've been talking to them for a long time about partnering together, because they have been really creating a wonderful open source community around vaccine credentials and moving this technology forward to actually get it implemented and get it live into the world, which is obviously very well aligned with our goals here. So we're thrilled to have them. Our presenter is going to be Lucy Yang, who is one of their co-leads, and then we'll be joined in Q&A by two of their other, by two of the other co-leads. If you do have a Q&A, please do use the Q&A function. What we'll do is we'll collect all of the questions during the presentation, and then at the end, we'll have plenty of time to answer those questions at that point. So please do use that function within the Zoom chat. Somebody just submitted a question. Excellent. This presentation is being recorded. The recording will be shared out afterwards. We also are going to be doing a second iteration of this presentation in a US evening and APAC morning time for all of our friends in Asia. So and we'll have announcements on that shortly. Keep an eye on our Twitter, etc. With that, I am going to pass it over to Lucy. And thank you all so much for being here.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Let me first share my screen. Make sure I can see my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Just one.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, John. Cool. Hi, everyone. Belated Happy New Year from Toronto, Canada. So I'm Lucy Yan. I'm the Community Director of the COVID-19 Credentials Initiative. Thanks all for joining the webinar today. We're very excited to meet the bigger LPH community today. And of course, as well as those of you who are eager to learn more about CCI and LPH and what we're doing with vaccine credentials. So before I dive into the main topic, I want to provide some context by introducing CCI a little bit and how we evolved to what we are today and the relationship between CCI and LPH. So CCI was initiated, like Jenny mentioned, in spring, like in April 2020, after COVID started to spread out globally by a group of technologists who are working on an emerging standard and technology called verifiable credentials. So technology were being used and deployed in both private and public sectors prior to COVID for various industries and use cases already. But when COVID hit, we realized the tech could potentially help address some of the really important issues. So we came together and formed this community where we identify COVID use cases, discuss the use of tech, the tech and its implications. So especially how privacy are protected through its implementations, and have community participants present their COVID credential projects in their local, they're implementing locally, get input and learn from each other's experiences. So CCI continued to serve as a forum like this for the past 8 to 9 months until December. That is when we joined Linux Foundation Public Health and announced our shared mission of our joint efforts, which is advancing the use of verifiable credentials and data technical interoperability of verifiable credentials in the public health realm, starting with vaccine record for COVID-19. So our conversation with LPH started in late summer 2020, not long after it was founded. So we realized CCI needed to engage more with key decision makers and stakeholders, especially in public health, for us to keep doing meaningful work. So when LPH had achieved success in exposure notification apps and wanted to start addressing vaccine credentials, it all naturally happened, and it happened fast because we were very much aligned on the key values and goals. The most important one being building interoperable and privacy respecting tech for COVID and public health use cases. So CCI now is hosted by LPH, and we're working closely with LPH staff, advisors, and believe after today, the broader LPH community as well on the most important issues for vaccine credentials. Quickly go through the slides. So probably let me start. The topic of today is an introduction to vaccine credentials. So what do we mean by vaccine credentials? So in the CCI and LPH context, we mean using of an emerging standard verifiable credential to present proof of COVID-19 vaccination, which can be verified digitally as an alternative to vaccination record cards. So you're probably going to ask, oh, why you want to use this technology? So because verifiable credentials have the potential to provide the close experience to paper credentials while offering additional benefits. So let's look at a very simple example. Meet Sarah. So Sarah got vaccinated just yesterday. So what happened is she went to the vaccine clinic and she got vaccinated. And before she left, she got her card, and the vaccine clinic staff told her, this is your own legitimate proof of vaccination, so keep it safe. So after Sarah got the card, it's great that she can now go to places where a vaccination record card are required. So the next day, when she went to work, and the security guard said, okay, can you show me that you already get vaccinated? And I need to see your ID as well, because I need to know if actually you're the person on the vaccination record card. So Sarah showed the security guard both her COVID vaccination record card and also her vaccination ID, and also her driver's license. So then she got good to go. But this process seems relatively simple, but there are multiple questions. So questions with the yes, security guard gives Sarah. So what, and also questions about what would happen, for example, if Sarah lost her only card. Right? What if Sarah fabricated her card? How is the verifier supposed to know? How is the security guard supposed to know? And what if Sarah accidentally dropped the card in the water on her way to work and the text went blurry? And also the last, another very important question is, did Sarah want the security guard to see all her information on the driver's license and vaccination record cards? So we're talking about your birth date, your date of birth, your address, and probably more information. So with this question, so let's come to what the alternative route can be provided by verified credentials. So what would happen if a verified credential is in use for this contact? So Sarah would still have to go to a clinic, and the clinic staff give her vaccination, and after that, Sarah, instead of receiving a paper card, she will receive her vaccine credential and the format of verified credentials in her digital wallet on her smartphone. And the next day, when Sarah went to work, so she can the security guard, she can only present the security guard a QR code, and once the security guard scans the QR code, and he or she will be able to get a yes or no to decide if he's going to let Sarah in. So here, let's clarify what a yes means. So when a security guard in this situation got a yes, what he is actually getting is, first, the vaccine credentials the vaccine credential comes from a place which has authority to issue it. Second, the vaccination actually happened. Fourth, the vaccination happened to the person, happened to Sarah, who presented this piece of credential. And lastly, if there's an expiration date, the credential hasn't expired. So you may wonder why a simple action of scanning a QR code will give that kind of assurance. So let me just explain simply. So the most important flow to understand here is there's no, between the clinic and between the security guard, between the building, the system the security guard is using to scan Sarah's QR code to verify Sarah. So there's no direct integration and no third-party intermediary, which means when security guard is scanning the QR code, they're not asking the issuers if Sarah got vaccinated. They're also not asking the third-party database or if Sarah got vaccinated. So this happened just without any integration and intermediary. So we can think about a situation where probably you guys are familiar with. So whenever we're using Google and Facebook logging other sites, so what we call federated identity model is your whoever you're using your Google or Facebook credentials to log in, Facebook and Google will get an idea, where are you, which site, which vendor you have a relationship with. But in our situation, there's no such connection, and there's a trust between the verifier and clinic when the security guard and the clinic when they get a yes. So why that happened? So very, very simply, not getting into any of the technical details. So verified credentials has a very unique architecture, and also there's advanced cryptography in place to make sure so this happens. And what in between all of them is a public utility that what I described has a unique architecture, and also that's where a lot of cryptography are happening. So you have more questions around that. My colleague will allow to answer your questions later. But here, just to understand, so there's no this is how the trust is being established, the technical trust being established between the clinic and the office building. So here, let's summarize. So what some of the benefits verifiable credential have in use for vaccine credentials. So what are the similarities between verifiable credentials in this scenario with paper credentials with a vaccine record card is the user will have the similar type of control in terms of the user have the piece of credential in control in their smartphone, in their digital wallet. And also the control comes from there's no third party, no direct integration between the issuers and the verifiers, and also there's no third party in between. And the second, it's also one of the most important thing here, most important merits for paper is interoperability, because you can just Sarah wherever she goes, as long as she has that piece of paper, she doesn't have to worry about she won't get into a building, because like she can carry paper everywhere, and then there's no systems that is pretty much human beings are checking the paper instead of systems. So that kind of interoperability is one of the most important merits of paper, which can also be offered by verifiable credentials, because verifiable credentials is building on an open standard, which means it doesn't really matter if you use one vendor, like different vendors can build on this technology. So as long as the open standard, they're building on the standard, it will ensure that no matter Sarah goes, that piece of QR code can be scanned and can be verified. The third benefit which verifiable credential has over paper is obvious, is the durability. So in the scenario of using a smartphone to store your verifiable credential, there's a way of backing it up. So even if your smartphone is lost, Sarah will still be able to get the credential when she gets a new phone. And the next three benefits are something very, very unique to verifiable credentials. And first is privacy preserving. One thing I think what you already noticed in that process, Sarah doesn't have to present any actual information. Is what she's showing the security guard is just a QR code. So when security guard scanning, he or she won't be able to see any personal health information. Obviously, there's a lot of things going behind the scene. And one thing you may wonder, in the paper credential scenario, Sarah has to show a piece of ID. But in this case, why security guard when the security guard is scanning the piece of QR code, how he or she's supposed to know if Sarah is the person who owns who is the holder of the vaccine credential. So that's where a lot of technology happen behind the scene that already bind Sarah's photo ID in the digital wallet with that piece of credential. So when Sarah is presenting that QR code and security guard is scanning that piece of QR code, the verification of that just happens behind the scene, which means Sarah doesn't have to show any of the information, only have to show minimum amount of information, which is just a yes or no in the end. And another important matter to notice here is also what I mentioned earlier, because there's no third party intermediary and also no direct integration between issuer and verifier, so they won't be able to know where Sarah went and when Sarah go to see a movie, when Sarah go to office. So the fifth thing, which something like paper doesn't offer, is tamper evident. So because of the advanced cryptography and also the public utility used and unique infrastructure used here, so when and there's the technical trust that can ensure that when the security guard got a yes, and it's a yes. So the last piece is a portability. So the digital wallet Sarah used can be a universal wallet, similar to something like Apple Health, but more for verifiable credentials, or it could also be a wallet built for specific purpose. For example, if Sarah got her credential in the first place through an app that her employer offered, and she received, but what if she has to leave? She has to leave company. So the nature, the technology will allow Sarah to transport this piece of credential to other apps which can hold verified credentials. So that's the portability. So hopefully, like now we have a brief brief understanding of some of the benefits, some of the similarities and benefits between verified credentials and paper credentials in the use for vaccine credential. And next, you probably also wonder how verified credentials are compared to other digital alternatives. So here we can first we kind of think about PDF. So because I know that in some jurisdictions, PDF are an option for people to receive the vaccination record. So here a PDF is easier to store. It has more durability compared to paper. The key drawback is it is not tamper evident and is not privacy preserving. And the second is proprietary software. So here, proprietary software, we mean those that are not built on open standard. So there are definitely software going to build purposefully for different kind of use cases for vaccine credentials, but those who are not building open standard will create silos and monopolies. And in this scenario, interoperability will mean that everyone needs to use that one vendor, which is definitely not possible and definitely not ideal. So it won't meet the interoperability vaccine credential needs. And the third one is networking platform that are not built on open standards. So what I mean by networking platform, so there are certain alliances and partnership networks who are building things together. And which means like it's not only limited to one vendor. So you can, as a vendor, you can join. So as long as you're building on the platform, you will have the interoperability, which have the similar issue of the second one is not everyone will be using the same platform. And so only when you're using the same platform, there's interoperability, which is also not ideal and not possible. So hopefully we have now a little bit more understanding of how verified credentials are compared to other digital alternatives. So next, let's talk a little bit more about implementation challenges. So here, implementation challenges, I mean, when an employer, when public health authorities are implementing, rolling out vaccine credential programs. So what are the things that what are the potential challenges you are going to encounter? The first is emerging standards and technology. So the standard, the open standard we're building on verified credentials is a standard that approved by W3C. The version 1 is approved, and it's still the reason why we're saying it's emerging is because a lot of like the details are still evolving. So that's one consideration, and one potential challenge, because as it's evolving, there probably will be new standard item that will be taken into consideration where we're rolling out the vaccine credential. And there are certain things we're not like standardized yet within verified credentials. So second is verifiable credential related technical specifications. So these are a lot of these technical specifications are being worked on within subgroups in Linux Foundation. The third group is vaccine credentials related standard. Here, I mean, for example, a universal standard, universal vaccine schema, which data elements are going to go into a piece of vaccine credential, which will be adopted globally. So these are the things that are evolving, but not fully defined yet. So this could be post challenges when it comes to real life implementation. So second is existing infrastructure and workflows. So the main difference between launching text result credentials and the vaccine credentials is they're already existing, I think, for example, existing like regional or even national systems and also workflows to manage immunization record or vaccine records. So I think most countries now are thinking about using the same system or similar system for vaccine credential for COVID-19 vaccine credentials. So if we're going to launch vaccine credentials using verified credentials, then we need to figure out the issue and the sourcing information flow. How are things being implemented now, or for paper vaccine records? Second, how the vaccination record registries are managed. And third, compatibility with healthcare systems. So how vaccination records, how the data with all the vaccination records, we're going to interact with existing healthcare systems. So these are the different, the complicated intricacies we have to figure out when we're building a vaccine credential program or system. The third thing is communication to the public and public trust. So which is a lot of the work I've been doing and was with Linux Foundation public health staff. So this is how, because the public have been familiar with using a paper card, we're using paper credentials. So now we're launching a digital, a credential in more like a digital format, then how are we going to explain the what and the why and the how? Some of the concerns or some of the questions the public generally have is, oh, how my privacy going to protect it? What if I don't have a smartphone? Or is this something, now it's going digital, am I going to be more tracked than am I going to be, my information where I go are going to be tracked? So that's important. That's why it is important to explain, what are technology being used, why certain technologies are being used rather than others, and how this technology is going to work and especially fit in the existing workflows. The last piece is also very, very important piece is ecosystem building and governance. So here, ecosystem, I mean, as we talked about earlier, because a lot of the use cases will be more contextualized. For example, like airline alliances, right? The travel industry alliances, building on a system that works particularly for their use case. So how and then and probably even like the one employer can launch a program. So in Sarah's scenario, we can go back. So who should define which issuers have the authority to issue vaccine credentials? How is Sarah supposed to know if the verifier has the authority to check her credential? And what if Sarah doesn't have a smartphone? Right, all these issues. This is something I didn't mention in the earlier part. So we talk about the technical trust in place that ensure when security got a yes, it is yes. But what is happened even more important behind the scene is the human trust. That's what we're talking about, like the rules and the guidelines. And also the importance of having a governance authority which defines all these rules and provide the guidelines in a governance framework. So that's something whoever implementing needs to think about who we need to bring on board to define those rules to make sure that the human trust is there and the system will be a trusted system. So now hopefully we have a better understanding of what we mean by vaccine credentials and some of the implementation challenges. So what is CCI and LPH's roles, goals, and what we've been doing? So a lot of our work, as mentioned earlier, is communications. So we hope to communicate with different stakeholders and in our most important, very important, like 3 categories. First, public health authorities. I hope that today's webinar is a good start. The reason why public health authorities are very important and are on top of the list here is because as I mentioned, like one of the key challenges is we need to learn about, understand the existing system and where should be the data sources. Should it happen at the very beginning at the vaccine clinic, or should it happen after the data already goes into the vaccine record registry? So where questions like this needs to be figured out in real life scenarios so we can get things start rolling. And second, commercial entities. Here I mean like businesses and employers who want to leverage vaccine credentials to open their businesses and workplaces, which we've already received a lot of questions and inquiries from. So now what we're working on is working with LPH members and CCI participants, see if we can come up with a list as a start. And here I want to mention the importance of working with LPH and CCI is we are aligning a group of vendors and our members and participants around at least a commitment to building on open standards, which is very important was very important for whoever want to implement it to start as a starting point. And the third thing is the general public. So that's what we've been leveraging a lot of mainstream media. For example, we're on NBC and CNN Business, and I believe a lot more will coming up in the upcoming weeks and months. And another two categories of work are an open standard and open source development, which we're mainly focusing on first understanding existing landscape. So what has happened? What has been done? What is being done to align the standard, and also what we can do to align interoperability efforts and facilitate the development of a common open standard for vaccine credentials. And on the open source side, beyond understanding existing landscape, because we've learned a lot from building LPH, have learned a lot, and we've learned from them how open source building minimal viable components and open source set can speed up and the development of systems and software in a pandemic. So that's why we for the credential, for vaccine credential, we want to do something similar by start to define and identify what are the minimal viable components for open source we can develop. And once we're there, we are going to develop or repurpose existing open source code bases. And the CCI workstream, the CCI subgroups, our role are to unite, identify a community practices and help us understand the landscape, and also support a lot of the development work either on the standard side or with development side. So I will get a little bit more into each of those. So on the open standard side, some of you may know, so WHO is assembling a panel of experts to work on smart vaccination certificate. And we're joining the first discussion next week. So in the WHO, I will share a link later on the call to join the panel, the expert panel. But what we can see from their call for application is they want to address a lot of important standardization regarding the schema, like what data elements should go into a vaccine credential, what they call smart vaccination certificate, and also on the data format, and also on the exchange protocols. So here are the two things I listed on the right: a unified vaccine credentials data format and standardized VC exchange protocols is where we believe that CCI can provide unique value, because that's where our community's expertise lies in. And with open standards, so our existing activities mainly revolve around identifying who are doing the work. And for LPH and CCI, it doesn't necessarily we have to leading in an effort, but we're also looking into collaborating with whoever already leading effort. And if WHO is covering all these important areas of standardization, we're definitely in full support of their efforts. And on the open source development side, so what we're thinking about is, so I mentioned universal wallets, and also what more beyond that is basic issuer and basic verifier app. So here, the idea is definitely not to replace existing solution vendors. So the idea is two things. First, provide minimal viable user experience. So this is mainly for, think about your local grocery stores, right? They won't be able to afford to build a system for themselves. So hopefully if public health authorities, the government can build something so they can easily adopt, or someone like LPH, we can have a very, very basic component for them to be able to use their smartphone to scan the QR code of a person. And what's more importantly, so we are looking into minimal viable components for public health authorities and businesses to work with their solution providers to contextualize easily, cost effectively, without interoperability headaches. Oh, sorry. So a little bit more about our work streams, our existing activities at CCI. So the use case implementation work stream and rules and governance work stream existed since day one when CCI was initiated. So the use case implementation work stream identifies verifiable credentials that are most useful to COVID responses and provides a forum and platform for those who are implementing these COVID-19 VCs to present their project solutions and get community input. So a lot of our projects we've seen And we're having in upcoming weeks and months are focusing on either test results credentials and vaccination credentials. And rules and governance workstream, as we already talked about how important governance is. So this workstream defines rules and guidelines for general or particular COVID-19 credential use cases and develop MVP governance frameworks to enable solutions to be deployed at speed. So in 2020, so we've already had 2 versions of the general frameworks, and hopefully in 2021, we can start to work on customizing, contextualizing the framework for the specific use of vaccine credentials. So lastly, so there are very active community members based in the US are forming a group, a focus group on like US vaccine credentials. Here, so at CCI, we're a global community. We don't favor any jurisdiction. So we hope that this will be a good starting point where we can set up a template where if anyone else from other jurisdictions want to form a group, that would be great. So the idea of forming this group is because everything needs to be contextualized for your own jurisdiction. Each jurisdiction probably have a different workflow. So we want to start conversations to understand the real life workflows of vaccine records and how existing system work, so we can come up with potential identify trusted and scalable ways of rolling out vaccine credentials. And this group, and as we're still drafting charter, will release more information as we move forward. And this group will be focused on the use cases in the US, but won't be limited to only US-based participants. So lastly, so how to get involved in CCI? So there are multiple ways. So we have a mailing list with groups.io. So you can join our main group, which is our member group. You will receive regular CCI announcement and news. And you can also choose to join a CCI subgroup, and we will keep expanding the subgroups to receive regular activity notifications and start enjoying group discussions. And the mailing lists are where we have more regular email exchanges. And if you want to stay up to date with high-level CCI news and related industry news, you can subscribe to our bi-weekly community newsletter. And you can also follow us on social. We're on Twitter. We recently become are on LinkedIn, and also we have a Medium account as well. And also, as Jenny mentioned, there's a CCI channel in FPH Slack community. So join there and join the conversations on Slack. So lastly, as we're going to get into the Q&A session, I want to introduce a little bit more like my colleagues. And first, John Walker, he's a community architect at CCI. So John is a solution architect who has a lot of experience in self-aware architecture, data infrastructure, and especially with existing healthcare systems, such as EHR, and also existing standard like FHIR. His recent work has been on data capturing and transporting between legacy health systems and medical credentials. For example, the inclusion of HL7 formatted data to be leveraged in the creation of an immunization credential. Kalia Yang, she's also known as the Identity Woman. She is an ecosystem director of CCI. So Kalia is our digital identity expert who has facilitated the birth and growth of many identity standards and technology, which work behind the scene of our everyday life, probably I think in the past 15 years. So she has been a strong advocate for user-centric identity, which verifiable credentials are built to achieve. And her deep relationships in the verifiable credential space help us understand the complicated intricacies of the tech, which are key to achieving full interoperability. So without further ado, I'm going to give back the floor to Jenny and see if any questions.
Oh my goodness, are there questions? Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody also who's been upvoting the questions, because that makes it easier to dive in. So yeah, we will have Kalia and John also join on the video. And we'll switch off the screen share. There we go. Wonderful. So I think that there's a couple of questions that are all on a very similar theme, which is really, can we dive further into like do these systems need to be, do vaccine credentials need to be hooked up to a state or national vaccine registry? Do they need, what level of centralization is required? Where do you get this proof of vaccination? Let's start maybe by diving into that. And Kalia or John, one of you want to?
Sure. So I'll take a stab at that. So if the system of record is, let's say, an IIS repository, right, that represents a state or a jurisdiction, I'll use the United States as an example, then the credential, right, the information on the credential would be derived from that repository. So you would have a software vendor who probably represents or does that work for the jurisdiction, and the credentialing would be added to that existing valid client software that talks to that system of record.
So Jenny, I just want to add a little bit here, because I think there's like a word, decentralization. So it's so our goal, especially in the case of a pandemic, right? It's hard for us to change any existing system that is there, and also like for example, in the U.S., right? Either the state have registries or whatever existing registries there's the need for public health people to actually access data, and then they can do like proper monitoring and management. So that's something we won't be able to change, at least not in the near term. So the idea is how we identify what's the best source of that data. And that's what I mentioned in my presentation, where like the issuance should come from. I believe John, he is leading the US focus group on exploring there's multiple paths. It can either be, from the very beginning, it's similar to paper where like vaccine clinics issued it. Probably that's ideal, but if that's possible, that's something we need to work with public health authorities to figure out. And if not possible, because my understanding is now existing kind of PDF are issued when you opt in some places in the States, you can receive the PDF later through some kind of mechanism, right? This could be also similar to verifiable credentials, when you can opt in at the early on, and then a credential will be issued, and the data source will not be from the vaccine clinics, will be from the existing the data and registry, which the vaccine clinics are sending the data to.
Got it. And so what I'm hearing is that there's a bunch of different ways that we could implement this. And it doesn't need to be hooked into a vaccine registry or a centralized place. It could actually, if the clinics are issuing this, it could be done in a fashion where it's quite decentralized, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So and also it's like we won't be. So if for example, if folks think that existing system is too centralized, this is something we can't change. So that's something also we want to clarify. Is how we work with existing systems, because we're dealing with a pandemic, right? And that's something, if we're talking about decentralization, it's what I want to clarify.
Yeah, and I think that follows up with a second question, right? To help understand further how this new environment can work, right? Is there have been a couple questions like, who decides what's in a credential? And questions like, does it matter which vaccination you got, or can you actually have a credential that says that you are antibody positive, and so therefore you've got some natural immunity? Who decides what goes in a credential?
So I think early on, these questions came up in our work, and it's really not up to us to decide. So verifiable credentials is an open standard that allows the expression of almost any information you want by an issuer about a subject or the ultimate holder of the credential. So this is where, the work that the WHO is doing in terms of defining a smart vaccination record definition and schema comes in, and where, work with public health authorities to make these types of decisions. We're working on the technology, the information rails to allow this type of information to move. We want to lean on the expertise of the folks who are already making these types of decisions to just leverage this new emerging technology to support it's being digitized in a way that's both cryptographically trustworthy, but also connected up into the systems that make it trustable by other institutions.
Yeah, great. And
I shared a link there, which the call for expert, nomination of expert by WHO. So you can go there and get a sense of what kind of experts they're looking for, and also what kind of technologies they're evaluating.
yeah, which is actually a great lead in. What are there alternatives to verifiable credentials to underlie some kind of vaccination credential? What are they? Are there, would they be interoperable with verifiable credentials? How would that work?
I think Kalia is the best person to
I'm the person to answer that. I think there have been there's work that there's been sort of isolated work to implement something immediately. So Singapore Airlines does something called AOK. There's been other efforts going on. The good news is the IATA effort actually leverages verifiable credentials. Several other efforts are. The reason that verifiable credentials are, I would argue sort of the only game in town is that they are open standards based and that any vendor can implement them. So it's really about creating a common language to exchange this type of information. And that we're hoping that isolated efforts can converge towards this standard so that it is interoperable.
So what you're saying is that if we don't base this on some kind of open standard like verifiable credentials, and verifiable credentials is really the only strong candidate for an open standard on this, then we're going to get a lot of companies building out proprietary systems that can't talk to each other.
Yes.
Got it.
And there's also some work being done around developing sort of more complex rules engines. Those systems could consume verifiable credentials, right? We're not in the rules engine business, and I think there is large actors sort of trying to develop those as well.
And a rules engine would be something where there's sort of a checklist of have you had a vaccination or are you antibody positive? Is your birth, are you over 18, this, that, and the other, and a list of things that you either, and you check yes or no on each of them essentially. And it says, great, you can come through or not, right?
Right. And it could be specific, obviously it would be specific to jurisdictions, right, to the adoption by specific geos. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with this idea around interoperability and different systems and how they work together, there have been some questions are the PDF alternatives, so the printout versions that you've talked about, are those actually verifiable credentials? And how, and then also, and I'm seeing you nod your head there. And then also how does this, is this different from an Apple wallet, like an iOS wallet or an Android wallet, something that we already have on our phones? Like, how do these help me understand a little bit further how these pieces interact together?
Oh, that was two questions in one. So my understanding is that folks have developed ways to express verifiable credentials that are real verifiable credentials in QR paper-based form. There's also form factor alternatives. There's a company called Tangem that produces small cards where you could have actually an electronic version of your verifiable credentials stored on a card. So that's that question. And the other question about sorry,
Apple wallets, iOS
wallet. Yeah, I mean, so there are wallet there's folks who build wallets for verifiable credentials. There's actually a conversation going on about potentially building, you know, the equivalent of today's, you know, web browsers, large web browser backends, sort of like a universal wallet. Maybe that will happen, but there's lots of wallets for verifiable credentials, and there's no reason that the large players like Apple and Google couldn't also, you know, set up their wallets to be able to accept these. But so far that isn't in the works, but it's very similar. Yes.
Great.
So I would comment on the PDF. I would just say that a verifiable credential is an alternative output to a PDF. A PDF can be tampered with, and so you have the same trust issues that you have with generally exchanging emails and different, you know, again, secure documents via email or SMTP. So verifiable credentials avoids those pitfalls.
Yeah, I just want to, Jenny, just one distinction I want to make here. So there are, so PDFs, you do like similar as paper, you print every piece of information on PDF, which is different than what Khalil was describing as you embed a QR code, right? Like a verifiable credential in some format on a paper or in a card. So that's different. So I just want to clarify here a little bit.
Yeah. So another really popular question from Aaron. How would people who, like, let's say you're in the lucky group who's already been vaccinated? Have you missed out on the VC train? Are you never going to be able, like, can you still get a credential later? Do we have ideas on how that might work?
I can probably take this, and so it goes back to the earlier question of where the data source would come from, right? So if the data source comes from the vaccine clinic when you get vaccinated, then probably will be hard. So that's the reason why it's important to talk with all different kind of like implications of you implementing different workflows. So if the data source come from actually the registry, the database, like the state is managing, right? It could be, right? It could be if your app give a person, once your information, your personal ID is validated, and then okay, I want to get, right, my verifiable credential in my wallet, and then that can potentially happen. So so that's something that needs to be considered early on, and yeah, it's hopefully it answers the question. It's possible,
and could be supported via an opt-in, right, at the time of receiving the vaccination.
And then so let's dive into one of the more technical questions, which so verifiable credentials are based on the blockchain, right?
not necessarily.
Not
Not
necessarily.
necessarily.
So, okay, so then maybe, but let's dig into this question a little bit more, right? Because it's saying what ledgers are the verifiable credentials being rooted in, and is that up to the vendor? And do you end up with interoperability challenges if you get the VCs being if you get the VCs on different ledgers?
So to clarify, the main use for blockchains or distributed ledgers in these systems is really to anchor the cryptographic key material of the issuer. So the issuer takes the key material that is needed to be exposed publicly, so that then any verifier can go check the ledger and find that key material to be able to do the cryptographic calculations on the credential that's presented to understand whether it's been tampered with and whether that issuer actually issued it. So it's really, there are many different ledgers that you can put the key material on, and there's a lot of work that's been done around a universal resolver. So it's pretty easy for verifiers to go look up that key material in whatever ledger it's stored on. So yeah, that's an issue, but it's not a big one. It's really being addressed by the current ecosystem pretty well, I think.
Great.
One thing to add, because for the non-technical folks, like the ledgers we're talking about is what we were referring to earlier in the presentation as public utility. So just to make the connecting dot there.
Great. And so I think we probably have time for one final question, which is, and I think this is another great question from Timothy. So there's a lot of conversation about whether vaccine credentials are something we should do or not, right? There's ethical implications to it. There's a lot of questions around it.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about this in the context of your own work and the work that we're doing with CCI?
So I'll say that I did some research and I was really surprised to learn how old vaccination records are and their usage broadly in the global system that we have today. They're 90 years old. The first international treaties around information needed by travelers to cross international borders about their health status relative to communicable diseases is really old. So the question that we have is not so much, should we do this? We do it now, and we have done for many, for almost 100 years. And in fact, public health measures go back, millennia to how humans have figured out how to live together in large groups with communicable diseases. And we need to really just figure out how to update it for now and how to do it in the best privacy preserving ways. But to sort of say somehow we're just going to not do it because it's digital is I think a fallacy.
And probably one thing I can add here, I think a lot of the questions or concerns are not necessarily around the credential. It's just more about how the credential is used, right? And there's the terms that are being used like passport, which we don't recommend using because that's a government issued document. If it's going to be used as a passport or not, because whether it's digital wallpaper, it can be used as a passport, right? But it's not a decision, someone like us can make. So, but in terms of using technologies to facilitate the process, right? And that's something that I think it's worth considering if especially if there's technology in place that can, and also there's ways that especially we are exploring into, right, how for example those without smartphones, right, how they can still use physical cards or even print on piece of paper, which not too ideal, but still there's multiple ways. And also if you read the WHO, that the call for a nomination of an expert, there's already a draft principles they put there, and all the important kind of consideration, the principles, they are suggesting that's something we also very, very dear to, and close to us as well. We want to work on those.
Wonderful. Well, we are out of time. There are a lot more questions here. We would love to continue this conversation. The best place to do it is on our Slack channel. And we'll pop some of these questions in as we go from here to start the conversation there. So thank you all so much for coming, for giving us your time, for your questions. And we'll be emailing out the recording of this. We'll email out all of those things on how to get involved and follow up with us to all of the participants here, and hope to see you at our next event. Great having you here, and have a great rest of your day.